Okay, sorry to interrupt our regular programming. We're going to cross live now, though, to the UN Security Council. It's preparing to vote on a resolution on whether to impose even tougher sanctions on North Korea following that nuclear test. Let's listen in.
Received 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has been adopted unanimously as Resolution 2375 of 2017. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who want to make statement after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the U.S.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for calling this meeting and allowing us to have this vote. The images from space of Northeast Asia at night show brightness and prosperity surrounding a dark, lonely space that is North Korea. Those images are a good illustration of where the North Korean regime is today. It is alone, it is dark, and it's getting darker. North Korea's neighbors, its trading partners, and the entire international community are united against its dangerous and illegal actions. Today's resolution builds on what were already the deepest cutting sanctions ever leveled against North Korea. We've been down this road before. The Security Council has expressed its condemnation. We've leveled sanctions. But today is different. We are acting in response to a dangerous new development, North Korea's September 3rd test of a claimed hydrogen bomb. Today we are saying the world will never accept a nuclear-armed North Korea. And today the Security Council is saying that if the North Korean regime does not halt its nuclear program, we will act to stop it ourselves. Over the years, we have learned many things about the North Korean regime. We have learned that it does not care about being a part of the community of decent, law-abiding nations. It has violated every United Nations resolution against it. We have learned that the North Korean regime doesn't care about its own people. It has denied them the most basic necessities to finance its weapons program. And we have learned that half measures against the regime have not worked. Previous efforts to bring North Korea to the negotiating table have failed. They have repeatedly walked back every commitment they have made. Today, the Security Council has acted in a different way. Today, we are attempting to take the future of the North Korean nuclear program out of the hands of its outlaw regime. We are done trying to prod the regime to do the right thing. We are now acting to stop it from having the ability to continue doing the wrong thing. We are doing that by hitting North Korea's ability to fuel and fund its weapons program. Oil is the lifeblood of North Korea's effort to build and deliver a nuclear weapon. Today's resolution reduces almost 30% of oil provided to North Korea by cutting off over 55% of its gas, diesel, and heavy fuel oil. Further, today's resolution completely bans natural gas and other oil byproducts that could be used as substitutes for the reduced petroleum. This will cut deep. Further, a large portion of North Korea's revenues come from exports, revenues they use to fund their nuclear program. Last month, we passed a resolution banning its coal and iron exports. Today's resolution bans all textile exports. That's an almost $800 million hit to its revenue. When these new stronger sanctions are added to those passed last month, over 90% of North Korea's publicly reported exports are now fully banned. Moreover, this resolution also puts an end to the regime making money from the 93,000 North Korean citizens it sends overseas to work and heavily taxes. This ban will eventually starve the regime of an additional $500 million or more in annual revenues. Beyond the $1.3 billion in annual revenues we will cut from North Korea, new maritime authorities will help us stop them from obtaining funds by smuggling coal and other prohibited materials around the world by ship. Furthermore, this resolution prohibits all joint ventures with the regime, resulting in a significant amount of lost revenue. But more importantly, the regime can no longer obtain critically needed foreign investments, technology, and know-how needed for its commercial industries. Finally, this resolution imposes asset freezes on the most central North Korean regime entities, affecting both the military and the government itself. In short, these are by far the strongest measures ever imposed on North Korea. They give us a much better chance to halt the regime's ability to fuel and finance its nuclear and missile programs. But we all know these steps only work if all nations implement them completely and aggressively. Today's resolution would not have happened without the strong relationship that has developed between President Trump and Chinese President Xi, and we greatly appreciate both teams working with us. We have seen additional encouraging signs that other nations in Asia have stepped up to the plate. The Philippines has cut off all trade with Pyongyang. Thailand has drastically cut its economic ties with North Korea. And states much farther away are also doing their part. Mexico recently declared the North Korean ambassador to its country persona non grata. Along with strictly enforcing sanctions, these are important steps toward complete international unity. They make clear that all nations can act to deny North Korea the funds to build its nuclear arsenal. Today is a solemn day in the United States. It is the 16th anniversary of the terrorist attacks that killed nearly 3,000 innocent people, most of them in this very city. It hurts as much today as it did 16 years ago. We will never forget the victims of September 11th, and we will never forget the lesson that those who have evil intentions must be confronted. That day, the United States saw that mass murder can come from a clear blue sky on a beautiful Tuesday morning. But today, the threat to the United States and the world is not coming out of the blue. The North Korean regime has demonstrated that it will not act on its own to end its nuclear program. The civilized world must do what the regime refuses to do. We must stop its march toward a nuclear arsenal with the ability to deliver it anywhere in the world. We must do that by cutting off the fuel and the funding that supports it. We don't take pleasure in further strengthening sanctions today. We are not looking for war. The North Korean regime has not yet passed the point of no return. If it agrees to stop its nuclear program, it can reclaim its future. If it proves it can live in peace, the world will live in peace with it. On the other hand, if North Korea continues its dangerous path, we will continue with further pressure. The choice is theirs. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for her statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Japan welcomes the unanimous adoption of Resolution 2375. We would like to express our great appreciation to the leadership of the United States, which has made it possible for us to adopt this resolution today. We also thank all other members of the Council for their support. By swiftly adopting Resolution 2375 today, after North Korea's ballistic missile launch on the 29th of August that flew over Japan, as well as 6 nuclear...
Okay, been watching live coverage from the UN Security Council there in New York, where they have unanimously voted in favour of the latest resolution, the latest sanctions against North Korea, which the US Ambassador Nikki Haley described as being the strongest ever sanctions imposed upon North Korea. They, in essence, will cut off more than half of North Korea's fuel supply, which Haley said would hit their ability to fund their weapons facilities, not forgetting Kim Jong-un has previously threatened that if this resolution was adopted, which it has been, he would respond towards the US with pain and suffering. We'll keep you up to date with this story as it develops. Before the vote, the North Korean leader, as I said, warned Washington that it would pay a price. Let's find out more.
The forthcoming measures to be taken by the DPRK will cause the US the greatest pain and suffering it has ever gone through in its entire history.
Yeah, earlier we discussed the upcoming vote with Craig Earlham. He's a senior market analyst at Oanda.
I think it's in both interests to return to the negotiating table, and perhaps this is a sign that the US is now willing to go down this route. But ultimately, it's going to be the responsibility of all the countries involved in order to achieve this, not just the US and not just, of course, North Korea. Russia and China are both the other two major players in this, and let's be honest, this is a strategic issue. Let's not pretend that this isn't a major factor in these negotiations. This isn't a major factor in the reason why the US and Russia and China are not necessarily on the same page. That's why a diplomatic solution is so important, because the last thing we want, it's not about escalation in tensions between the US and North Korea, let's face it. The last thing we want is the relationship between the US and China and Russia to fall apart, because the more stable this relationship is, the more stable the global environment is.
OK, well, let's discuss that vote now by bringing in a guest. Lawrence Davidson's a foreign policy analyst, joins us on the line. Lawrence, we've got it. It's unanimous. It kind of was anticipated, but these new sanctions, they were watered down somewhat. It's believed to get support from Russia and China. Does that mean that diplomacy is finally winning?
Well, you better ask the North Koreans if diplomacy is winning. I don't think the sanctions are going to move the North Koreans to change their policies. In fact, maybe it'll just drive them into a corner. Or they'll feel the necessity to respond by sending a missile, I don't know, over and landing in Guam's harbor or something like that. I think that the diplomatic negotiations between the United States and Russia and China in order to get unanimity here is in fact a step in the right direction, because you're going to need a coalition, particularly involving countries that do have some influence with North Korea, in order to attain a long-term settlement. So to the extent that this sets a precedent, which then can be used to move in a direction of a coalition that can use leverage on the North Koreans in a diplomatic sense, that's good. But the sanctions themselves are not going to solve this issue.
So unified in this particular vote, but what about the fact that Russia and China proposed a freeze for North Korea on nuclear and ballistic missile tests, and that South Korea and the US should basically rein in their military drills? Why would South Korea and the US not agree to that proposal?
You know, I don't know. Because if you ask yourself, what is it that these joint exercises do, except perhaps make the South Koreans feel more secure? They don't do anything, and certainly the North Koreans understand that, because it's been going on for decades and nothing has ever happened to North Korea. In other words, the exercises never manifest themselves in any aggression. So they're just an act. It's play acting, essentially, for the sake of, perhaps the South Korean consciousness. But so if you ask me, these joint exercises are a negotiable thing. I mean, you can say, okay, you stop the missiles, we'll stop this, because it doesn't cost you anything, really. Now, whether in fact the North Koreans would agree to stop their missile tests or something like that in exchange is something else, because within the North Korean environment, the environment of the leadership, these missile tests play a different role than the exercises do for South Korea and the United States. They play a much more important psychological role in the minds of the leadership of North Korea. I'm guessing here that, I mean, I haven't talked to them lately, but I'm guessing that that it plays, or that it shows them to be strong, brave, spitting in the eye of the enemy. They've taught their own people to expect that. And so they might not want to give it up.
Lawrence, Vladimir Putin said he doesn't think the conflict is going to turn into a large-scale one with the use of real nuclear weapons. But also, as you said, the North Koreans may well feel that they've been kind of forced into a corner now. How big a danger do you think there is of a nuclear conflict?
No, I don't think, unless they're utterly suicidal, I don't think that's going to happen. I must admit, I'm only correct 80% of the time. I don't think that's going to happen, though. But I do expect a ratcheting up of missile fire, of missile tests, and perhaps more underground nuclear explosions and this sort of thing. I wouldn't be surprised at that. But I don't think we're looking at a really serious war, because I don't think they have the capacity. The North Koreans, I mean, they've got what? How many warheads do they have? How many missiles do they have? I mean, not enough to carry on a war based on that. They've got a very, very large army. That army is under-equipped. It's equipped with older conventional weapons. Its air forces probably wouldn't stand up for more than a day or two. So I think that, we're not going to go to war here. But, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to say that Kim Jong-un, he's fairly new to the job, so to speak. He's made certain threats and has followed through to an extent in terms of the missile test, heading, towards something bigger. What's the track record in terms of North Korea following through with its threats? Do they tend to be empty words or not in reality?
Well, I don't think their track record is very good in terms of following through with their more exaggerated threats. My feeling is, look, that nuclear weapons, and I think they understand this, that nuclear weapons are deterrents, right? If you don't want the United States, for instance, to invade your country, what you do is you get yourself a nuclear weapon and the capacity to deliver it, and you keep it there and you say, don't invade my country, and it's a very, very good deterrent. But what the North Koreans seem to misunderstand is that that's really what it is. It's a deterrent. It's not something you throw up in the face of your enemy, I mean, because then you're playing, a very, very dangerous game on thin ice. Now, I don't think that it's going to result in a war. But, it is, after all, an unfortunate time, because we've got in North Korea a leader who is a bully, as far as we can tell. He's a bully, and he's bombastic, and, doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. And then you turn to Washington, and you've got the same kind of leader. So you've got these two guys who are very much alike in some ways. And that's why Trump once said he kind of understands the leader in North Korea, see? Because they're very much alike, but essentially there can be no affinity because of the psychological factors that drive particularly the North Koreans. It's a dangerous game. It's a dangerous game.
How would you describe the US mentality? Earlier, we heard the message coming out of Washington that patience was running thin, all options were on the table, suggesting the military option was a real one. Now the US envoy, Nikki Haley, is saying that the US isn't looking for war with North Korea. The point of no return has not been passed. What has driven that change in the message they're sending?
I think it's always been there. I don't think that the fire and fury speech that comes out of Trump's mouth ever really was going to drive policy, though there was always a potential for it to do so because he is, after all, the president. But I think that it's bad cop, good cop kind of thing. And also because Mr. Trump doesn't know how to keep his mouth shut. And so he's going to say things that he feels, that he really does feel, on impulse. And you can't stop him. So you get these kind of things, the fire and fury business. And then the diplomats have to come back and reassure the rest of the world that, there's another policy here. But I don't think you can take everything that Mr. Trump says as driving policy, though you can take it as a real window on how the guy actually sees the world. But he's hemmed in, just like most people in the United States, who are politicians, they're hemmed in by a system. See? And that kind of temporizes things. Thank God,
Lawrence, I just wanted to say that I've really enjoyed getting your perspective on this. Great to get some informed insight on important things like this. Lawrence Davidson is my guest, foreign policy analyst.
Okay, my pleasure.